Greetings, I'm Holly Hughes, one of 4 co-curators of the Northwind reading series, and I'm pleased to be co-hosting this reading tonight with Sheila Bender. Other members of our team are Sharon Carter and Linda Robertson. This is the last reading of our 2020 season, our first season since the 4 of us took the helm from Bill Mawhinney back in February. Like many arts organizations, we adapted our series in response to the pandemic, posting videos of our readings online for our viewers to enjoy at home. Over the last 8 months, we also partnered with Peninsula College's Tide Pools, Centrum, and Raven Chronicles Press, in addition to our annual Ekphrastic event and several anthology readings. We're wrapping up our season with another collaboration, a reading inspired by a powerful exhibit on view this month at the Northwind Arts Center called Manzanar by photographer Brian Goodman. The title referring, of course, to the camp where thousands of Japanese Americans were incarcerated during World War II. This moving exhibit of black and white photographs represents 40 years of dedication by Mr. Goodman to documenting this shameful chapter in our history when Japanese Americans were rounded up by the thousands, taken from their homes, businesses, schools, and communities with little notice, and forced into cramped and crude barbed wire fenced camps. Our 2 featured poets tonight, Sharon Hashimoto and Lawrence Matsuda, both of Japanese American heritage, will add their voices in powerful witness to the impact of the internment camps on their families' lives. Before I introduce them, I'd like to share a few of the images from the exhibit. Our first reader tonight is Sharon Hashimoto. Sharon was born in Seattle and is a lifelong resident of Washington State, a poet and fiction writer. She is a Sansei, 3rd-generation Japanese American with paternal ties to Hawaii. Her MFA is from the University of Washington. She was a William Rainey Scholar for Poetry at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Her poems and stories have appeared in Shenandoah, North American Review, Tampa Review, Crab Orchard Review, Poetry, and others. For 29 years, she taught at Highline College in Des Moines, Washington. In 1990, she was awarded a National Endowment for the Arts in Poetry. She is currently at work on a novel. Please welcome Sharon Hashimoto.
I really want to thank Northwinds for having me and Larry do this reading in conjunction with the exhibit, and that I thank Linda and Holly and Sheila for hosting and doing all the arrangements for the reading, because I know technology is super hard to do, especially in this time of the pandemic, and I myself struggle horribly with it. So the fact that you guys are able to do that, I think, is wonderful. A little background about myself is that, like many Japanese American families in the 60s and 70s, my grandparents and parents didn't say much about the internment. And so what happened is I was kind of like a shy young kid who was always on the edges of everything, observing. And how I learned about the internment was by kind of like listening, and I started by looking at a lot of family photographs. And the first poem I want to talk about is called Those Were Completely Different Times. We grin at the 40s version of one Shig Kiyohara, the ink from cursive always bleeding into his shoulders. Page after page of old photos, women home perm their shoulder-length hair, combing curls back from their foreheads. Men palm smooth any black hairs. It was the style for a gal to wear pleated wool skirts, bows on open-toed high heels, and a man posed with his 2 buddies, his extended arms resting on their shoulders. Between the breast pockets, their army ties disappear. They all smile. We ask ourselves, are they going out to a dinner, to a movie? Beyond this picture's edge, they stroll together down the road. A Ford with slotted grillwork slows close to the girl. The girl, her big button cardigan pulling to the sides, bends near to offer directions for the lost. Jap, a white woman, spits over the glass. The girl's fingers fly up to her own rouged mouth, and she takes a step back while the men swivel on their heels. With uniform strides, they swarm the driver's door, 6 hands fisted and beating the metal. One man stops to pull forward the patch on his sleeve. He stabs his finger at the 5-pointed star, then yells, "We're fighting Americans." The girl sways. She flinches at the war in their faces. This next poem came out of a workshop with the poet Kim Stafford. And I was in the audience and trying to learn about poetry. And he came in, and the first thing he did is he put this big toolbox on the table in the middle of the room. And he started pulling all sorts of things out of it. Things like a piece of string, a bird feather, a wooden checker. And what he was trying to do was emphasize the fact that anything could be a poem. And he wanted to told us to keep our eyes open for possibilities. And he's pulling things out one after another. And he comes to the end. And what he does is he pulls out this piece of barbed wire that he says was outside a Japanese internment camp called Heart Mountain. And that's where my mother's family was sent. So he gave me a poem. This is one of those pieces where the title is the first line of the poem. Because you showed me a piece of barbed wire that had lain in the dirt road beside a lone sign marking all that remained of barracks, road and eclipsed by the shadow of Heart Mountain, I thought of my mother beginning her tour of Japan. What would she say if she saw me with a piece of her past cupped in my hand? Would she tell me if the guard tower rose to her left, perhaps to her right, as she stepped down from the bus, sleepy and holding her mother's hand? Or would some things simply remain unspoken? On the plane, she would be napping, the pages of a sunset magazine fanned by her breath. The small shutters closed, the movie would flash by, unremembered. But outside, clouds would buoy up the wings, buffet the metal. A suitcase in each hand, she'll wait patiently while my father scowls, passing through customs under neon signs she won't understand. Into Tokyo, they'll continue. I turned the knotted path of wire, smelling of ghost dust, touching the barbs that held everything in. One of the things that I loved to play with as a kid was something from my grandfather, was this great big enormous rock, this really huge thing that he said it might be a dinosaur egg. And so I learned later that to keep themselves occupied, some of the internees, what they do is they go outside the camp and they look for fossils. And this is Interned in the Heart of the Country. My grandfather searches for fossils. Watching the dust scurry away from his feet, he must have thought of the weight of waves as they curled, then flattened into a ripple, and how the sun always floated to the surface in pieces. There in Wyoming, pale sand could have slipped like silk through his fingers, leaving the fossil in the palm of his hand, the empty print of a conch still hard and precise, where the long grooves once fluted the water. Turning from the mountain to the flat yellow land, did he feel the slow drift of tides surround him, the horizon pressing miles on his eyes? Perhaps loose grains of stone crumbled at his touch when he glimpsed the thin pole of his shadow pointing east. What did he look for on the long journey back as one step followed the other? Years later, my mother would tell me how she'd lie awake in her narrow cot and wait for the small sounds of her father's return. The next poem is titled Reparations, My Mother and Heart Mountain. Unrelenting, the sun breaks down the white paint, and the slight incline of the barracks tin roofs buckles or cracks with the 4 years they have weathered. Dust and sweat shine like a cap of heat on the top of my mother's black head. Grit chafes her toes. Her shoes scratch the rough door. So I imagine her at 13. Her memory blurs the exact picture with a few facts she can recall. And I ask her, what do you remember? She tells me, your grandmother made us think it was an adventure to hang blankets at night and make our own rooms, to fall asleep listening to the wind and each other's coughing as floodlights filled the slits in the walls. So those first 4 poems were kind of like earlier poems when I was still kind of like finding out kind of like the history and details of my past and the history and the people that came before me. And what I realized is that my family history and memory was very inexact. Partly was because it was me being so young. And what I was doing was I was listening in on the conversations or when they got together. I remember one instance, my aunts and uncles, they had just seen the movie Farewell to Manzanar, and they were comparing notes. But whenever I kind of asked questions, it seemed like I kind of put them on the spot. And so I got a lot of information just being very quiet and kind of listening. And this is one of the stories I kind of heard about. This is called Day of Departure, May 9th, 1942. 12 years old, she struggles with balance, one arm dragging the folding chair whose rusted seat flaps open, the other hand grabbing a suitcase. It's humid, so hot. Beneath her winter coat, her best blue striped dress, the one with puffy sleeves, itches. On this last day in Yakima, heat grows from the ground into the pleats. The blinds for windows are latched down. When she boards the train, she trips on bags and bodies. In that midnight dark, a group of young voices sings, "Don't fence me in," until they tire. When she rises from the folding chair, a bump in the track jolts her footing. For miles now, a stranger's leg has pressed into hers. From his sweating suit, a man's stink spreads. My grandmother belonged to a poetry group, and probably about twice a month they'd meet, and they would write haiku, and they'd had a diddle machine, and they would publish these, and they would send them out to each other. And I kept those stapled together pamphlets and eventually had them translated. And this piece is based on her writings. 7 haiku from my grandmother. Knock, knock on door room, peeking through a keyhole, I see another eye. Elder person's room, everyone fascinated with the poinsettia. Face after face stare back. I shrug, my weak hearing makes talking look odd. Lip licking around me, people gossip, tasting many distressed words. Autumn yellow leaves, thin sun, only one sudden night of wind, all gone. Early I wake, cold, the comforter escaped, not staying on my back. Coins in our pockets come and go, gains and losses, a parallel line. The next 2 poems I kind of wrote together, and they're in a form called Anglo-Saxon meter, where you hear one consonant or vowel sound repeats about 3 times. I also want to say that as I grew older, I read many more books. I read literature, sociology, I wrote political books, and I did a lot more research, which included going to reunions in actual places. And I was at a recreation of a barrack, And I'd been told about in the course in pictures, but until you are in such a small place with the cots, the potbelly stove, you don't get a real feel. And I remember just staring and thinking about the one window in the barrack. And I was looking at the metal clasp that they had on top and how it opened. And I was thinking about those super hot days in the summer and how everything leaked dust and how it was so poorly made. So the first one of these is like one's going to be on the outside and then the other one's going to be on the inside. The first one's called A Barracks Window Outside. Not meant to last, the mean molding is slats of wood set side by side, while tar paper panels have peeled, all nailed with 9 quick strokes. Knotty pine boards patrol the porch, protect against glary glass-eyed glances. Windows widen at the top. The window blows in brown bits of sagebrush, nice ill-starred islands of indigo. Outside, night owls might dream, observe sunsets slow sink into shadow. Lanterns burn low. Guards call, the lights out. At that same place where I saw the recreation of the barracks, there were 2, I guess you'd call them older ladies. They were sisters who would come along. And what they told us there is they produced a picture, and it was of 2 little girls looking out through a barracks window. And they looked very much alike. And to the day that when we went to see the barracks and we were talking about the picture and everything else like that, they themselves couldn't tell who was who in the picture that was taken from the outside and they were inside. And this is called A Barracks Windows Inside. Picture 2 girls in Peter Pan collars, bangs banging foreheads, bouncing on cots, chatty chins cocked. They chat, jump rope jingles joining their hands. 70 summers swept by, streaks of gray grizzle these great ants. Sister, what did we see? Sagebrush, barracks, blankets, potbelly stove. Same, same. Even now you sneeze like me, long sniff then snort. Bathroom stinky. The desert all dust, damn Paul's mouth. Thirsty, tepid water in tin mugs. Nothing was nice or clean. Nightfall, black-haired babies, bald all the time. Wind wiped away. Now who is who? All the adults in all the camps were asked to answer questions on a forum that became known informally as the loyalty questionnaire. And responses to this questionnaire were meant to aid the War Department in recruiting the 2nd generation into the All-Nisei combat unit. This has an epigraph that says, "Are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty whenever ordered?" And the title of the poem is A Matter of Loyalty, question number 27. With a single light bulb burning over a table sawed from a crate, it's hard to read this question. How can anyone be willing to serve when guards, those shadows in the tower, warn us off, away from barbed wire? Snakes slip under, back and forth to either side. Why not holes in barrack walls let in dust? We stare at our one window where the only lock we can open is inside. To kill or be killed by bullet or bayonet or bomb in combat duty? Who can raise a rifle, peer through the night, shoulder thumping at the recoil? Who can burrow into blasted terrain, fire a flamethrower into a bunker wherever ordered? Neighbors murmur, bearing down on the tar paper roofs. The sun warms the rooms with a black smell. From day to night, there are so many shades of sky. This next poem is a short one. It's called Somonka, the Rock Garden, Father in Camp, Son in War. Jackrabbits nibble grass. I roll stones, shove left, more right. the eagle's head, wingtips, tail, your name on the honor roll, out of dust, rises in flight. Today, bullets buzzed over men's helmets, high-pitched whistles, no moats pure and long, no shakuhachi. Army boots march up mountains. So the internment was mostly my mother's family story, but the war brought many Japanese together, and my father came from Hawaii. And he had stories about feeling the island shake when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And eventually what happened was Fort Lewis brought him and my mother together. Before he died at age 93, this is one of the last stories he told me about a letter he received from a close friend when he was a young man. And it uses pidgin English. Letter to my father from his friend overseas, August 1944. Dear Isami, hey brother, it been long time since you, me, and crazy guy Clyde walk out of old McKinley High. Remember playing pool, stick in hand, elbow in air, ball in side pocket, on wall, how we see Uncle Sam, eyebrows all bushy white, pointing finger, I want you. Good thing Clyde bad eyes make him 4F. Good thing your mother say no, you too young. Recruiter give me stink eye because I Japanese, but I member 100th Battalion, one puka puka. First, we think uniform with arm patch, stripe, make us look good. Here's secret, Japanese small. So small, we wear girl clothes, blouses cut down. Sometime we get special requisition. Compact boot, too big. Kilo guy wears size 2.5 triple E. Camp Shelby, Mississippi, meet all kind people. Mainland boys call me Buddha head, but I no pig. We Hawaiians call them katonk, you know, coconut sound, hinting ground. Sure, they get confused. I say, you go, stay go. I go, stay calm. He shake head, point finger that circle round and round. Other explain, you go ahead and go, and I'll come later on. Bye, we get along. And then we go Italy, but both take long time. Zigzag around submarines, berth 5 deep, me on top. Everybody sick, sick. No make fun. First time fighting, I get chicken skin. German tank fire. Man next to me go down. Arms, legs, all twisted like. Blood all over throat. Pow, gone, so fast. Caden, I say to self, but lots more. Isami, this hard to say. Maybe you think, what's the matter you? Every day we watch high place and broken building. We go face down in mud. Lucky one carried out on stretcher. Try pretend, try not ask. Today, day I die. Stay home, Isami. This for real. Your family needs you. No come, stay. Long as you can. Your pal, Tack. This next piece is a form called an abecedarian or an alphabet poem. And that's where the first letter of each line follows the alphabet. So you have first line is A, B, C. If you listen closely, you might hear the words. And the date is the day when the second atomic bomb hit Nagasaki, Japan. August 9th. After the flash, blasting flat the shoji screens, brushstroke cranes, straining necks disappeared into ash. Mothers evaporated. Children floated on sides of buildings, ghost of minutes before. Halo light lingered, illuminating the cleared miles between blue jutting mountains and the horizon. Before the lover's kiss was complete, lips barely brushed, one mushroom cloud bloomed. Negative and positive burns outlined women's backs. Patterns of water lilies or chrysanthemums, quotes inked on a scroll. Cries ricocheted throughout the ruins. Survivors stood, stuttering. So much was taken. Children sat hunched under broken umbrellas, rocking themselves. Vertical scuds in walls creaked. Where would fireflies go? X-rays couldn't find them. Yanking on a barren branch, people discovered 0 blossoms left to fall. Okay. So my last poem comes from an exhibit. And this was at the Smithsonian as the Natural Museum of American History. And the title of it was called A More Perfect Union, Japanese Americans and the US Constitution. My walk is slow among the black and white photographs. So many shots of the same landscape with different names. Manzanar, Minidoka, Gila River. The same pictures of the evacuation order nailed to buildings and telephone poles. Too young to have been sent there myself, I pass another portrait, then stop and turn back. This one of men in fedoras and overalls, sweatered mothers in line with kids. Suddenly, you're there, the teenager ladling chili into a bowl. Have you been sent back to stand over the steaming pot? A placard on the walls behind you says, dinner is served cafeteria style at the Heart Mountain Relocation Center. This is you who now tells me you don't remember much except sagebrush and coal for the pot-bellied stove. Hair edges into your eyes and you tilt your head down. Nothing matters but the stripes on cuff and collar of the baseball jacket you wear. Careful not to spill when you give back the bowl. Do you look at the face of the hand that takes it? Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that powerful reading. It's clear that as a young girl, you observed a lot, and it's a real gift that you've given us in being able to envision so vividly the life of families in those internment camps. Our next reader is Lawrence Matsuda. Lawrence Matsuda was born in the Minidoka, Idaho concentration camp during World War II. He and his family were among the approximately 120,000 Japanese incarcerated. In 2010, his book of poetry entitled A Cold Wind from Idaho, about the World War II forced incarceration of Japanese Americans, was published by Black Lawrence Press. In 2014, his book of poetry, Glimpses of a Forever Foreigner, was released. It was a collaboration between Matsuda and artist Roger Shimomura, who contributed 17 original sketches. In 2016, he and Tess Gallagher collaborated on Boogie Woogie Crisscross, a book of poetry developed from emails they exchanged where she was in Ireland and he was in Seattle. In 2019, he completed a novel based on his mother's experience entitled My Name is Not Viola. Please welcome Lawrence Matsuda.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Lawrence Matsuda, and I'm reading poems from my book, A Cold Wind from Idaho, and I'm holding it up here, and sometimes I do this okay, and sometimes I don't. But I want to thank Linda Robertson, Sheila Bender, Holly Hughes, and the Northwind Reading Series team for making this presentation possible. Also, I want to welcome Sharon Hashimoto, a fellow poet. First, I'll take some time to provide background and context information about my poems. I was born in Minidoka, Idaho, the War Relocation Center, which was an American concentration camp during World War II. We lived in Block 26, Barracks 2, and my poems deal with the topic of the World War II forced incarceration of Japanese Americans and its effects and lingering after effects. Second, people often ask, why did the forced incarceration take place? Presidents Reagan, Bush Sr., and Clinton stated 3 causes in their letters of apology: racial discrimination, wartime hysteria, and failed leadership. In comparison today, how are we doing as a country in terms of racial discrimination? Wartime hysteria, which was called propaganda then and now fake news. And finally, failed leadership was the 3rd cause. So my question is, How far have we come as a country since then? Overall, 120,000 Japanese Americans were taken nationally. Approximately 40 to 50% of the incarcerees were children, 2/3 American citizens, and the remainder, or 1/3, were older people, non-citizens, because they were not permitted to become naturalized. And we as a group were considered a threat to America. My first poem is entitled Guerrillas, which takes place in 1942 when the Seattle area Japanese were taken to live behind barbed wire at the Puyallup Fairgrounds Assembly Center, renamed Camp Harmony. Guerrillas. Mom wore layers, her best clothes, hid the baby bump, sat on her suitcase, strapped down the bulge, only way to bring all she could carry. No time to decorate the baby's room, buy a crib or attend a shower. Already sold the Baldwin piano she loved to play in the evenings. Silver set, never to be used, wedding gifts. No idea where soldiers were taking them. Machine guns and guard towers surrounded the Puyallup Fairgrounds, renamed Camp Harmony. Lanky blue-eyed private from Arkansas, rifle over his right shoulder and bayonet fixed to his belt, towered over a sea of black heads. Singled out Mom. She said he asked, "Y'all human beings? You look and dress like humans." At the fairgrounds in the decaying straw, some unlucky Japanese bachelors lived in the animal stalls. Barbed wire held the masses. Food psychologically tethered them like Pavlov's dog. Camp Harmony, a target-rich environment. Japanese orphans, babies, women, children, the infirmed and able-bodied. They must have felt their neck hairs tingle when the machine gun swiveled and the crosshairs hesitated. At one of my readings, an audience member stood up and said he was raped as a child and that the forced incarceration was like a rape of an entire community based on race. We behaved like rape victims. Some were angry, others in denial. Some were depressed by how a government they trusted betrayed them and their beloved Uncle Sam raped them. Some tried to prove they were worthy and volunteered for the army, and others committed suicide. Forced incarceration is not a single event that went away. It has a long-reaching after effects and consequences. For my next poem, The Noble Thing, the key vocabulary word is shikataganai, or it can't be helped. The noble thing. Dad never talked about Minidoka. That was the noble thing. Before World War II, there was Garfield High School for him, ice skating on Green Lake, dances at Lake Wilderness Lodge, later his ownership of Elk Grocery on Seneca Street. He and Mother were married in 1941, 10 months later to be removed, forced into the Minidoka concentration camp. Mom was 5 months pregnant in August with my older brother, Alan. With blackout curtains drawn, the train left Puyallup and climbed the Cascade Mountains until the land flattened and the inescapable sun transformed the train cars into a moving sauna. People gasped small, panicked breaths from the superheated air. Shikatakanai, it can't be helped. The train stopped by the side of an unmarked road in the Idaho desert, released its passengers miles from any station. Rumors spread they would be shot or marched to death, their bodies stacked and carted to some awaiting ditch. Nowhere to run, they walk in their best shoes in the gritty sand as on the face of the moon. The heat caused some to faint as they carried all they could. 3 years later, Dad returned to Seattle after the war, developed a bleeding ulcer, lost his janitor job at the Earl Hotel. Depression took Mom away like invisible guards. She was a stranger, a stick-like figure with arms and legs poking out of a white smock, pacing the sidewalk next to the Western State Hospital turnaround. Dad never talked about it. None of it. I never heard him say the word, Minidoka. Come on, endure the unbearable with dignity. Shikataganai, my best friend's mother, chose pills for suicide. After school, Randy, my neighbor, opened the garage door and found his father in a black suit, his best, hanged by the neck. Shikataganai, the same path other Seattle Japanese chose. Numbers unknown. Shikataganai. We, however, never talked about it. That was a noble thing to do. For some of the internees, they proved their loyalty by volunteering to serve in the Army. About 900 men and women volunteered from Minidoka to fight for the USA. And this poem is entitled Private First Class Harry, and it's about my father-in-law, Harry Sakuhira. And in order to understand this, there are a couple of vocabulary words. Bachan is grandmother, which actually it would be my wife's grandmother, but my father-in-law's mother. So Bachan is grandma. Haramaki is something that you wrap around your stomach. Hara is stomach, maki is wrap. And in Japan, they had what they called a senenbari, and Japanese mothers would stand at the railroad station and ask strangers to put a French knot into the senenbari wrap. And when they got 1,000 knots, they gave it to their son to protect them in war. Bachan didn't have the material for a senenbari, so she made a haramaki, a knitted haramaki. Private First Class Harry. Bachan unraveled her blue sweater as if possessed, ripped and salvaged yarn to knit a haramaki, wool wrap for her son Harry before he shipped out to Italy. Todd, her first son, volunteered. Snipers at Bruyères killed him before she could finish his. Knitting needles clacked furiously, not a missed stitch or a hole for a bullet to find. Yarn absorbed a tear, a mother's hope, transformed wool into a shield like chain mail. This warm wrap, a mother's protective surround. Each stitch was a loop in a paper chain, an umbilical cord that stretched to her son 6,000 miles away. Unable to write English, she knitted her love into blue wool, her scent into a package of blue, to touch her son once more. And by the way, Harry never got a Purple Heart. He got 2 bronze stars and a silver star. The next poem is an excerpt from a poem called Matsutake Tori. Matsutake are pine mushrooms, and they're very fragrant. They smell like pine trees, and they're actually in season now. And this is just a poem about my mother in Minidoka. And recently I wrote a novel based on her life, and it is called My Name Is Not Viola. She was born in Seattle, sent to Hiroshima, returned, graduated from Franklin High School, married, incarcerated in Minidoka, returned home, incarcerated again for depression at Western State Hospital, and finally lived a dignified life under undignified conditions. And so I call this little excerpt Midnight Dancer. And my son he once asked me, why don't you write something happy? All you're doing is writing these sad poems. So I said, okay, I never thought about that before. That's a good idea. That's kind of a joke anyway. But this is an excerpt from Midnight Dancer, and it's about as close as I could get to a happy poem. Pregnant in Minidoka, she wears her orange summer dress. She's round, like the full moon aglow, Mount Rainier ice cream cone round. Possessed by radio music from a nearby barrack, she waltzes alone after dusk, sachets near the barbed wire, undulates with my brother floating in amniotic fluid, kicking rhythmically to music from the crystal ballroom. She's just another wonder of nature, like ripe pears, apples, and pumpkins growing large in the summer heat. She remembers the fragrance of matsutake and blossoms. At dusk, she exudes a Northwest forest perfume that coaxes the Idaho honeybees from their silver cedar hives for one last nightcap. The next poem is dedicated to Ivanka Trump. And the quote, "History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes," is attributed to Mark Twain. And it's entitled, "Just a short note to say something you already know for Donald's daughter, Ivanka Trump." Ivanka, in a different time and place, you and your children are squeezed into cattle cars destined for Nazi death camps. Stars pinned to your coats and numbers tattooed on your arm. Religion is your crime, something like the 120,000 Japanese Americans whose race incarcerates them during World War II. If you dodge head shaving and starvation, maybe a country would welcome you. Angel of death is difficult to slip. Unfortunates are turned away, chased by verbal brickbats and pitchforks. You smell freedom's scent, but only glimpse porthole views of Lady Liberty's tantalizing torch. Doors slam and hands of kindness withdraw. You're not among privileged, huddled masses. Today, as a 1% American demographic, you're safe by an accident of birth. Others less fortunate, however, stand on precipices, knowing history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. When Donald promises a magnificent great wall and spews religious hatred to cheering crowds, you must feel a guilty twinge, knowing that if this were 1943 Germany, a chorus of incendiary voices would echo and push innocents off slippery cliffs into eternal darkness. Black hole so forbidding victims would never see their children again, while self-serving politicians levitate on bandwagons, swerving on and off a broken highway of 8 million bones. The last is an excerpt from my poem, Border Crossing. Even though the forced incarceration took place years ago, there are lingering after effects. Border Crossing excerpt. I carry my own fence. Barbed wire encircles me always. Determined not to follow my parents' path into clinical depression or a bleeding ulcer, my shins are raked by the steel teeth of my unwilled confinements. Wearing this yellow skin, I'm unable to walk freely in my own country, but I learn, border by border, to leap safely in sudden movements, leaving no remnants snagged on the wire. Thank you everyone for attending. To conclude, people ask why I read my poems about the incarceration. My reply is, it's part of my legacy as a Japanese American. And once I share my poems, the audience then owns a piece of that legacy. At the very minimum, after my readings, people cannot say they are ignorant. about what happened. And if the members of the audience are moved to action, I urge they push our government to release the forcibly incarcerated children from cages, and the 545 lost children are reunited with their parents. And if you really are serious and you really want more information about releasing the children in the camps, contact Sudu for Solidarity. That's suduforsolidarity.org. And it's an organization run by Japanese Americans who are working against the forced incarceration of children and others at the border. So thank you very much for your time. Good evening and be well.
We hope you'll want to read more of these fine poets' work. Larry Matsuda's novel, My Name Is Not Viola, is available, and you can keep an eye out for Sharon Hashimoto's collection of poems, The Crane Wife, which is being reprinted by Red Hand Press. Brian Goodman's book, based on these images, Manzanar, Their Footsteps Remain, 40 Years of Photography, is available online and at the Northwind Arts Center during the month of November. You can view the exhibit online at the Northwind website, www.northwindarts.org, or in person from 12 to 5, Thursday through Sunday. The exhibit will be up through November 29th.
Hi, I'm Sheila Bender, and I'm delighted to be one of the coordinators of the reading series. Tonight's reading by Sharon Hashimoto and Larry Matsuda was so moving, so powerful. We're really, really privileged to have these poets in our nearby community. They are both in Seattle. We want you to know that if you want to see more links to our other readings that we were able to record once the pandemic started, you may go to northwindarts.org, where you probably found this link, or to our facebook.com/northwindreaders. Also, had we been in person, we would have quoted Bill Mawhinney, as his words were always at the end of a reading, "Talk is cheap, but poetry is a bargain," and he would encourage everybody to donate what they could in the donation box. You can do that too by going online to northwindarts.org, and you'll see a donate button. Or if you are going to go see the exhibit, which would be wonderful, you'll see a donation box there. Thank you again for sharing this evening with us.